And that leads me right into League One because Dom Casciato signs a new deal with Union Omaha. And I said this before, for this to be a successful offseason for Union Omaha, lock that man up, give him whatever he wants because he is not walking out the door unless it's with a nice little transfer fee or it's you are walking out the door of your new stadium onto the field in your championship season. There's no other way this can go. And I think already at this point, it's just a highly successful season for Los Bujos.
I do think it's always interesting when a club feels the need to say we've extended the coach. Like I think so many clubs just kind of don't do that on the regular. And for Omaha to be aware of the fact that kind of everybody was watching the Dom Casciata situation and knowing that in an offseason where, let's face it, Omaha is always losing players because everyone wants somebody who's come up under Casciato. But for them to come out and say, listen, no matter what, we've got Dom back, that's a statement of intent. And you're absolutely right, Kayla, to say like that's a win of the offseason no matter what. Even if this team regresses a little bit from what was a historically strong 2024, you trust the process, you trust the system, and you know this team is going to be there when it comes to October.
When looking at other teams, we can talk about the expansion teams, and I do want to. But for me personally, I think if I'm looking at this most improved team, how can you not turn your eyes down south and look at South Georgia Tormenta and what they are building early on? They went from what are they doing for about 2 years after winning a championship to you better watch what they're doing because the roster that they have constructed at the moment is impressive and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like Austin Pack, a statement in and of itself, that's the best goalkeeper in the league for my money that you're getting to replace that kind of Drew Romig, Ford Parker platoon that was okay, but statistically looked quite poor on paper, and getting somebody who's rock solid and can hold down and play every single game if you need it. Defensively, I love the Jackson Casanzu signing. You might know him as Simba from his San Diego Loyal days. Somebody who's still only 21 years old and has a ton of potential to grow at Tormenta. Anatoly Prepolita as well, a player with some next pro experience who you figure is going to pair next to Casanzu in that back line. And then Gabriel Alves kind of rounding out the defensive additions. Alves, we've praised a ton on the show. He's good at left back. He can play as a central midfielder, very technical, very heady in his game. Those four players alone give this team such a defensive base that's going to set them up for success upfield. You just really love to see them committing to that area of the pitch, which was a real need entering the offseason.
And you mentioned Prepolita, who has time getting called up for the Moldova national team. You also have a player in Neil Reed Stefan as well, who's been called up for the Barbados national team as well, who recently scored in October or in one of his 20 appearances for the national team. So what Tormenta is building is something that is approaching getting back to that same level that won them a championship.
And on top of that, you're looking at a player, Taylor Gray, by the way. If you have not seen his film from Nisa, and I can't speak for his MLS Next Pro film because almost all that stuff is hidden kind of behind like Apple or just elsewhere. And I don't have Apple Plus, so I can't see that. But if you watch his Nisa film, he was one of the best offensive players in Nisa when he was in that league. And according to all accounts, he became even more well-rounded as just a player as he got older. For Tormenta to get him, there's your goal scorer and assister. You've been looking for the guy for a little bit. And honestly, he seems like the right replacement for Corey. You were wondering how could you replace that kind of player? I think you get it with Gray.
And Gray's somebody who kind of brings the effort no matter what. Like he's got the defensive numbers and the pressing numbers on top of the fact that he had 9 assists in Next Pro last season. That's the kind of player that can really set the tone for this team in a way that they didn't have last season. Like Pedro Fonseca was obviously the superstar attacking wise for this club. but whether he could get engaged, how they were using him, never really was consistent enough to pay the bills. Gray feels like the guy you can plant your flag down with and say, okay, this is who Tormenta is running through. Yes, we've got Tunbridge flanking him on the opposite wing. Yes, Connor Doyle's creating from the center of the park. But we've got the guy who can break down a set defense, and that's a big deal.
So I want to just kind of loosely look at these other expansion teams and Texoma. They are just announcing that they have coaches right now, which again, they probably do have signings and they're waiting. But when you are looking at being a new club and you're looking at not just be to your own fans, but talking about a wider media that's covering your club. When you're announcing we have coaches here, when everybody else is announcing we have basically a starting 11 ready to go, it feels like they are way behind the eight ball, especially when you are looking at Hearts of Pine, when you're looking at a Westchester, when you're looking at AV Alta, when you're looking at FC Naples, who only announces signings at 5 o'clock in the morning. I I mean, they seem like they're way behind, especially with these expansion teams. I think they're going to take it to the teams that are established. These look like great teams on paper.
It's an interesting dichotomy for me as I'm kind of looking at these rosters. I've been very vocal about the fact that I love what Alta is doing, but also at the same time, like Alta's kind of leaning into the name brand in a way of like Ibarra and Apollon and Elijah Martin. Those are very good players. Those are veteran players. Are they going to do the job versus someone like Naples that has gone a little bit deeper with, I don't know, guys from Next Pro, some college graduates? It's a pretty diverse roster, but you trust in the shape of the roster build right now. I kind of just made this similar point for Tormenta, but if you look at Delgado in goal, if you look at Breck Evans and Jake Dengler in central defense, and now adding Chris Heckenberg in the pivot, this is a team that's got the defensive core that's going to keep them solid and allow for the chemistry to develop elsewhere. Like that's a Naples team you can really believe in. So it's an interesting kind of give and take to the philosophy of how you want to try and build the roster if you are in an expansion situation.
So as we kind of wrap up League One sections, and there's a couple of players that I'm sort of interested in, but right now we're still just kind of waiting because there's just a lot of players who are still just kind of figuring out. One thing that I will say, because I'm just very intrigued by Hearts of Pine and Westchester in general. They have a couple of League One players in their build, but they are going from local university or kind of deep cut lower league somewhere else. And I find them fascinating because they are largely unknown quantities, which is terrifying if you're an expansion club. Because if you want USL quality players, get USL players, right? And they seem to be pretty confident in what they're doing. I'm fascinated by them. But we got a pretty interesting question into the chat, again from Luciano. And if you want to add questions to the show, please join our live chat. We normally record on Tuesdays. Right now it's Wednesday. With it being the off season, it's just, it's kind of in the air. Once we get into the season, we'll have a more structured schedule going on. But it's which team in either men's league has the most to prove this season. Now, this can be a lot of things. This can be which team should win a championship, and their expectation is to win a championship. Which is it to prove that they are still competent? Which is to prove that they were legit? Which teams stand out to you in any way that you want to take that question?
I think New Mexico United is the first team that comes to mind for me. Last season was such a major step forward for that club in almost every way. And I think the way that Eric Quill was so central to the way that they improved, so central to the way that they kind of defined a philosophy, found the roster that really fit them and gave that fan base something to root for. That was obviously a great leap forward in Albuquerque. And now, can they repeat it? They've splashed the money to go get Dennis Sanchez, who you have to figure was their number one guy to come in and coach this team. They're doing good things with the roster, whether it's Luis Fernando, whether it's, I'm forgetting the name of the defensive midfielder they just loaned in from Dallas. Show me that it's replicable in New Mexico. The best organizations in this league can do it year in and year out. Like, you've got your Louisvilles and your Tampa Bays that are constantly competitive at the top of the division. Can New Mexico United become that club? I think 2025 will say a lot.
For me, I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction and say the team that has a lot for me to prove this year is San Antonio. You have a team that's off the back of their championship in 2022 that has gradually stepped back kind of season after season to the point where their supporters group has just said they're not going to support the team for this year. And then you get San Antonio's ownership group trying to say that they want to upgrade Toyota Field coming into the season. I think it was about $1 million worth of upgrades. You part ways with Alan Marciana last season to bring in Carlos Llamosa here. And I think it really is kind of a season for San Antonio to win back the fan base, get fans back into Toyota Field to care about this team again, and also just prove that, hey, we're ready to be competent once more. And this is something you should start paying attention to again and start to care about again, because this really feels like a season of, if you can't get people on board, it might very well be a lost cause for San Antonio kind of moving forward.
Where my head went with this was straight over to Ford Madison, where they are still off the backs of more kits than playoff experiences or playoff appearances, right? More kits than wins. They had that whole thing going. And when you build a brand like theirs that is so social media heavy, you're going to get social media flack as well. They took the step. They took the step forward. They put together an amazing roster, and they are having to deal with an issue that they never really had to deal with before, which is they had such a good roster that other people want bits of it. What can Ford Madison do to not only stay where they are, but take the next step to not lose in the Jägermeister final, to make it to the USL League One final, to win one of those finals? Because that's where they are at this point. The expectation for them is to be a title contender. They are no longer the fun team that has the pink flamingos with the fun colors and the fun kits and kind of quirky on social media with Rose. What was it? Rose Cowbell? Was that it? Maybe.
Yes.
They're not just those quirky team anymore. They are a serious club. What are they going to do to maintain and grow that status? Because if they take a step back, I mean, I can't imagine the social media ridicule from it. Leonela Bessie, that was another good one of the cow